Every year, millions of people drive through Yellowstone thinking they've seen it all, but hidden around the park are places most people never even hear about. A sheriff who secretly ran the outlaw gang he was supposed to stop, and a mining town where men went underground and never came back out. These are 12 Yellowstone ghost towns you won't believe still exist. Number 12, Bannack, Montana. This was a town where the sheriff was secretly running the most dangerous gang in the territory, and for a while, nobody could prove it. In 1862, gold was discovered in a creek in southwest Montana, and within a year, thousands of people had rushed in, turning it into Montana's first territorial capital, with saloons, hotels, and businesses built almost overnight. But there was a problem, because there was no real law enforcement. Washington was thousands of miles away, and over the winter of 1863, more than 100 travelers moving between towns were robbed and killed, with attacks happening so often and so precisely that people began to suspect it wasn't random, but organized. Whoever was behind it seemed to know exactly when gold was moving and who was carrying it. The town elected a sheriff named Henry Plummer, a man who was well-dressed, respected, and trusted, and according to most accounts, he was the one running it. By late 1863, a group of citizens decided to act, organizing in secret and forming what became known as the Montana Vigilantes, and over the next 6 weeks they tracked down suspects, held their own trials, and hanged 22 men. Plummer and 2 of his deputies were taken in the middle of the night and hanged the next morning, using the gallows he had ordered built himself. After that, the violence stopped. The gold began to run out in the 1870s. And over time, the town slowly emptied until the last residents left in the 1970s. Today, more than 60 buildings still stand along the creek. The jail, the hotel, the school, and the gallows, preserved almost exactly as they were when people walked away. Number 11, Virginia City, Montana. This was the richest gold strike in the Rocky Mountains, and the men who found it immediately tried to name their town after the wife of the Confederate president in the middle of Union territory during the Civil War. In 1863, a small group of prospectors were heading through the region when they stopped along a stream in Alder Gulch and found gold, and within days word spread faster than they could control it, drawing in hundreds of men who followed them back to the site. What they had found turned into one of the richest gold strikes in the entire Rocky Mountains, and within weeks a boomtown appeared almost overnight, filled with miners, merchants, and anyone hoping to get a piece of it. The men who founded the town wanted to name it after the wife of the Confederate president, even though they were in Union territory, but the name was refused on official paperwork, and the town was instead recorded as Virginia City. The gold brought money, but it also brought violence. There was no real law, and the same network of road agents operating out of nearby towns was responsible for dozens of robberies and killings across the region, targeting anyone moving gold through the area. In response, the Montana Vigilantes stepped in, and over time they tracked down and hanged multiple members of the group, leaving behind warnings that became feared across the territory. When the gold began to run out, the town started to decline, but unlike many others, it never fully disappeared. Decades later, much of what remained was preserved, and today more than 100 buildings still stand, filled with original items from the time, with even a small railroad still running through the valley along the same route miners once traveled. Number 10. Kirwin, Wyoming. This is the ghost town where Amelia Earhart was building her dream cabin before she disappeared. And the unfinished structure is still sitting there today, exactly as it was left in 1937. High in the mountains of Wyoming, this was once a small but real community, isolated, difficult to reach, and surrounded by peaks that kept it cut off from the outside world for much of the year. Gold and silver brought people here in the late 1800s, and by the early 1900s, it had grown into a working town with homes, a store, a post office, and multiple mines carved deep into the mountains. Families lived there, not just miners, which made what happened next even harder to recover from. In the winter of 1907, a massive storm buried the area under deep snow, and one night an avalanche came down the mountain and hit the town, destroying buildings and killing several people. By the time spring arrived, most of the remaining residents packed up and left. They never came back. Years later, in the 1930s, a ranch was established nearby, and one of its visitors was Amelia Earhart, who became so drawn to the area that she decided to build a private cabin near the abandoned town. Construction began, and she planned to return there regularly. But in 1937, her plane disappeared over the Pacific Ocean, and the cabin was never finished. Today, what remains is just a small outline of logs in a quiet mountain meadow, surrounded by the remains of the old town. Everything stopped at the same moment. Number 9. Cineabar, Montana. This was the town that served as Teddy Roosevelt's White House for 16 days, and was completely abandoned 9 days after he left, as if it had only ever existed to receive him. In 1903, President Theodore Roosevelt arrived at a small Montana railroad town called Cineabar on his special presidential train. 9 days after Roosevelt boarded his train and left, Cineabar was abandoned. The town had existed for exactly 20 years. Born in 1883 when the Northern Pacific Railroad made it the end of the line on the route to Yellowstone, just 3 miles north of Gardner, Montana. The railroad was supposed to go all the way to Gardner, but a local landowner named Buckskin Jim Cutler refused to sell his land and blocked the route. So the depot stopped at Cineabar, and an entire town built itself around that depot. Tourists arriving by train would step off at Cineabar, climb into stagecoaches, and ride the remaining miles into Yellowstone's north entrance. For 2 decades, it was the primary gateway to the most famous park in America, with a hotel, a post office, stores, and saloons serving a steady flow of visitors from across the country. Then Buckskin Jim sold his land in 1902. The railroad extended 3 miles south to Gardner, and the depot building was loaded onto a flat car and shipped to the new stop. Most of the remaining structures were moved to Gardner or left to collapse. Within weeks of the Roosevelt visit, everyone was gone. The site of Cineabar was eventually absorbed into Yellowstone National Park in the 1930s, and the federal government never put up a single marker to acknowledge that a town had been there. Archaeologists from the University of Montana excavating the area in the 2000s found little more than depressions in the ground, broken pottery, bent nails, and sardine cans. And when they excavated the old outhouse, they found whiskey bottles alongside a girdle cinch, a suspender clip, and the stopper from a vial of holy water. Today there is nothing at Cineabar. No marker, no foundation, nothing to suggest a town was ever there. Only the knowledge that the first gateway to Yellowstone served a president, then disappeared in a matter of days. Number 8. Cooke City, Montana. This is a town the federal government essentially landlocked, drawing Yellowstone's borders around it without asking the people who lived there, cutting off every road out, and then spending $65 million taxpayer dollars to make sure it could never grow. There is a small community in Montana with about 90 year-round residents that you cannot reach in winter without driving through Yellowstone National Park. The Beartooth Highway and the Chief Joseph Highway both close in early fall due to snow, and for 6 months of the year, the only road in or out goes through one of the most strictly managed federal lands in the country. This is not an accident of geography. It is the direct result of Washington creating a national park and drawing its borders around a community that was already there, without asking the people who lived there how they felt about it. Cooke City was a mining boom town in the 1870s and 1880s when gold, silver, and copper were discovered in the New World mining district at the headwaters of Soda Butte Creek, right on what would become Yellowstone's northeastern border. Miners flooded in and a town took shape. But because the federal government surrounded the area on 3 sides with the newly created Yellowstone Park and the Crow Reservation to the east, there was never any way to bring in a railroad. And without a railroad, large-scale mining was never viable, the big money never came, and the miners trickled away. In the 1990s, a Canadian mining company proposed a major gold and copper operation directly above Soda Butte Creek, which flows through Yellowstone. The federal government eventually bought out the mining claims for $65 million in taxpayer money and shut the project down. The people of Cooke City never got a vote on any of it. Some wanted the jobs and some wanted to keep the wilderness, but what they wanted didn't much matter either way. Today, Cooke City is barely a town by conventional standards. but it is one of the only places in America where living there means your daily commute passes through wolves, bison, and geysers for half the year. Number 7. Jardine, Montana. This is the mine that spent decades producing arsenic for chemical weapons, 6 miles from Yellowstone's front door. And when a new company tried to reopen it, federal regulators let them pipe mining waste directly into a creek running through the national park before anyone stopped them. 6 miles northeast of Gardner, Montana, the northern gateway to Yellowstone, a dirt road climbs steeply into the mountains to a near-abandoned mining settlement called Jardine. From certain angles you can see Yellowstone's mammoth hot springs terraces in the distance. Gold was discovered at Bear Gulch in the 1860s, and Jardine became a proper mining operation by the 1880s. Over its working life, the mine produced over 155,000 ounces of gold. But gold was never the most alarming thing that came out of Jardine. Between 1923 and the 1940s, the mine also produced millions of pounds of arsenic, which was used for pesticides and, during World War II, for chemical warfare materials. All of it was processed in a plant a few miles upstream from the Yellowstone River. In the late 1980s, a Canadian company called TVX began a new gold mining operation at Jardine. The mine drainage flowed directly into Bear Creek, which runs through Yellowstone National Park and into the Yellowstone River. The mining company was cited multiple times for environmental violations, including piping mine drainage into a creek inside the national park itself, and the federal regulators who were supposed to be watching let it happen more than once before anyone acted. The mine closed in 1996. Today, the cabins of Jardine still stand on their inactive travertine terraces, the same geological process that built mammoth hot springs frozen in place. A handful of people still live there, and the mine is fenced off. The environmental cleanup of the creek took years and cost millions. If this kind of story is what you watch this channel for, subscribe. We go deeper every single week. Number 6. Garnet, Montana. This is one of the only ghost towns in America that is literally unreachable for months at a time. And what that isolation preserved is 30 buildings left exactly as they were when the last people walked out, untouched for 80 years. Garnet sits at 6,000 feet in the mountains of Granite County, Montana, 35 miles east of Missoula, and getting there requires 11 miles of dirt road that is not passable in winter. What you find at the end of that road is one of the most intact ghost towns in the American West. Gold was first discovered here in the 1860s, and Garnet went through multiple boom and bust cycles over the following decades. At its peak, around the turn of the 20th century, the town had about 1,000 residents, miners, merchants, families, and the full infrastructure of a mountain community. The J.R. Wells Hotel still stands, 4 stories of weathered timber rising over a main street lined with collapsed storefronts, cabins, and mine buildings. Some 30 structures survive in various states of collapse, preserved by the Bureau of Land Management. Garnet's final death came in 2 waves. A fire in 1912 destroyed much of the town, but residents rebuilt. Then a second fire in 1934 finished it. After the second fire, the remaining residents gradually gave up. The last regular inhabitants left in the 1940s. What the BLM has preserved at Garnet is not a restored ghost town, but an actual ghost town. Buildings in the state they were left, slowly falling back into the mountain. When the dirt road closes in winter, it closes completely, and the only way in is by snowmobile, making Garnet one of the few ghost towns in America that is genuinely unreachable for months at a time. The rest of the year, the silence and the elevation keep most people away. The hotel creaks in the wind over a main street carpeted in pine needles, and the mountains above it still hold the veins of quartz and gold that brought 1,000 people to this particular ridge and then released them. Number 5. Atlantic City, Wyoming. This town has been dying for 150 years and refuses to finish. Every time it empties out, someone stays, and that one bar from the gold rush is still open. Atlantic City sits a few miles east of South Pass City in the Wind River Mountains of Wyoming, at about 8,000 feet elevation, and it is the most stubborn ghost town in this region. The town was established during the South Pass gold rush of the late 1860s and was for a time larger and more active than its neighbor. Miners flooded in, and Atlantic City grew into a proper frontier settlement with a population running into the hundreds. Then the gold gave out in the early 1870s, and most people left. But not everyone. Atlantic City has refused to die for over 150 years. Every time it has emptied out, a handful of people have stayed, or new ones have arrived. The gold has come back in small surges, enough to keep a few miners working and a few buildings occupied. Today, about 50 people live there year-round, making it one of the most persistent near-ghost towns in Wyoming. The Atlantic City Mercantile, a general store and bar that dates back to the original boom years, is still operating. You can walk in and order a drink in a building where men were trading gold dust for whiskey a century and a half ago. The gap between those two facts, the emptiness of the high country all around, and the stubborn hum of life still inside that one building, is what makes Atlantic City unlike almost anything else in this part of Wyoming. Number 4. Old Trail Town, Wyoming. Old Trail Town in Cody, Wyoming is not a ghost town in the conventional sense. There is no mine that played out, no railroad that bypassed it, no disaster that drove people away. What it is, instead, is something stranger and more deliberate. A ghost town assembled by one man from the wreckage of the real ones. Bob Edgar, an archaeologist, spent over 40 years, from 1967 to his death in 2008, traveling across Wyoming and Montana rescuing historic frontier buildings that were about to be demolished or collapse. He dismantled them log by log, numbered each piece, transported them to Cody, and reassembled them on a single site along the banks of the Shoshone River. The collection he built includes 26 original frontier structures, among them a cabin where Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid once hid out, a cabin that belonged to Jeremiah Liver-Eating Johnston, and a saloon from Meeteetse where bullets fired during a genuine gunfight are still lodged in the walls. The graveyard at Old Trail Town holds the remains of Curly, one of Custer's scouts at the Battle of Little Bighorn, and of mountain men who died in the Wind River Mountains. Edgar never sought profit from the collection and never sold the site. Without him, most of what he rescued would have collapsed into the ground unrecorded. What he assembled is imperfect, curated, and entirely genuine, a last museum of a West that no longer exists. Number 3. Nevada City, Montana. This is a ghost town that shouldn't exist because almost everything here was taken from somewhere else. One man spent decades tracking down buildings from abandoned towns across Montana and Wyoming, taking them apart, moving them here, and rebuilding them piece by piece before they were lost forever. What you're looking at is not one town, it's dozens. The original Nevada City was a real gold rush settlement in the 1860s, built alongside nearby Virginia City during one of the biggest booms in the region. But when the gold ran out, the town faded like so many others, and most of its buildings were either abandoned, dismantled, or left to collapse. By the mid-1900s, almost nothing was left. That's when a wealthy Montanan named Charles Bovee stepped in with a different idea. Instead of restoring just one town, he began collecting pieces of many, buying buildings from mining camps, homesteads, and dying settlements across the region, carefully dismantling them, transporting them here, and rebuilding them side by side. Over time, the site filled with structures that had never originally stood together, a hotel from one town next to a cabin from another, all arranged into something that felt real, even if it never truly was. He filled them with original objects from the time, until the collection grew into one of the largest in the region. Today, what stands here is something unusual. A ghost town made from other ghost towns, a place built out of what would have otherwise been lost. And just outside it, a small railroad still runs through the valley, following the same path miners traveled more than a century ago. Number 2. Miner's Delight, Wyoming. This town was renamed by a miner after one good day in the dirt. And that name, given in a moment of pure gold rush optimism, is the most durable thing left from the entire settlement. The mining camp east of South Pass City in Wyoming was originally called Hamilton City, a respectable, optimistic name for a respectable, optimistic settlement. Then a miner struck a particularly rich pocket of ore in the ground nearby, looked at what he had found, and renamed the entire town after it. Miner's Delight. The name tells you everything about the culture of the gold rush. A town renamed after one good day in the dirt by men who had traveled hundreds of miles on the hope of exactly this feeling. The camp was established in the late 1860s near the South Pass goldfields in Wyoming, a cluster of cabins and mine buildings at the foot of a ridge in the Wind River Mountains. At its peak, it had a post office, saloons, a small hotel, and a few hundred residents. The gold district it sat within produced millions of dollars in ore during its brief years of intensity. But like every placer camp, the easy deposits were gone within a few years of being discovered. By the early 1870s, Miner's Delight was fading. A few cabins still stand at the site today, weathered and leaning, the wood silvered by altitude and dry air. The mountains above and the creek below are unchanged. The ore that created the name, and the name that outlasted everything else, is the most durable thing left from Miner's Delight. Number 1. South Pass City, Wyoming. This was a dying gold rush town where one saloon keeper changed the course of American history, and when Congress tried to punish Wyoming for it, the state told Washington it would stay out of the Union for 100 years before it backed down. South Pass City was founded in 1867, boomed to about 3,000 residents, and began dying almost immediately as the easy gold ran out. By 1872, it was in steep decline. By the early 20th century, it was a ghost. The last family left in 1949. None of that is the reason it matters. In the fall of 1869, a saloon owner and newly elected member of Wyoming's first territorial legislature named William Bright sat down at a meeting. Some accounts say a tea party hosted by a prominent local woman named Esther Hobart Morris, and came away with a purpose. He introduced a bill in the legislature granting women the right to vote in Wyoming territory. On December 10, 1869, the governor signed it into law. Wyoming became the first state or territory in American history to grant women full voting rights, 50 years before the 19th Amendment did so nationally. When Wyoming applied for statehood in 1890, Congress threatened to block it unless Wyoming removed women's suffrage from its constitution. Wyoming's response was direct. The legislature voted that they would remain out of the Union 100 years rather than come in without women. Congress backed down. The bill had the immediate effect of infuriating the existing Justice of the Peace, who resigned in protest. His replacement was Esther Morris herself. When she arrived to take office, the man she replaced refused to hand over his court records to a woman, so her first official act as a judge was having him arrested. She then tried 27 cases at the age of 56, becoming the first woman in the United States to hold public office as a judge, and not one of her verdicts was ever overturned on appeal. South Pass City produced a few $1 million in gold before the mines played out and the town emptied. 23 original buildings survive today as a Wyoming State Historic Site. Esther Morris is buried near the town site, and a full-size bronze statue of her stands in the United States Capitol representing the state of Wyoming. The gold is long gone and the buildings are falling slowly back into the mountain. But the law that was written in this particular saloon, in this particular dying gold rush town, is still in force, and has been for every American woman who has voted in any election since 1920. Drop a comment and tell me what town you're from so we can cover it next. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.